Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us on Ethical Perspectives. My name is Beth Parker, and I'll be your moderator this evening. Let's jump right in, and I ask that our panelists introduce themselves and share a few comments, perhaps a quick recap of episode 1 and a review of the takeaways from episode 1. Stacey, go ahead.
I serve on the Linn County Board of Supervisors, and of course, the last episode was a republic if we can keep it, and it was examining the stress put on our democracy 4 years over the 4 years of President Trump's term, and whether or not it was left in a position to survive. And I think the general consensus is that we have survived Trumpism. It's an open question of will we survive Trumpism into the future, but that democracies are fragile and they take work. And I think we're all prepared on this broadcast to put in the work. The larger question is the rest of the American electorate ready to put in the work?
Ty, go ahead.
Okay. I'm Ty Russian. I'm the former managing editor of the Northwest Iowa Review newspaper based in Sheldon. Recently relocated to Sioux City to get into corporate communications, but also plan on doing some freelance work to kind of, keep those journalism chops fresh, because you never know.
Laura, please.
Look at you back, Ty. I'm Laura Belin. I am the editor and publisher and the primary author of the Bleeding Heartland website, which is focused on Iowa politics, publishing original news and commentary from a progressive perspective. So in what I call my past life, I covered Russian politics during the post-Soviet period under President Boris Yeltsin and the early years of Vladimir Putin. And as we discussed last week, I've been really distressed to see some of the developments in the United States that I never thought I would see in this country, that are more like what I was used to covering in Russia.
Stacey, I'm going to go back to you. Maybe you've already answered this question. Let me just make sure. Why this topic, and what were you hoping to learn or share or accomplish?
I think this topic is not only timely, but it's important for posterity. I think our viewers need to sort of reckon with exactly how close we came to the catastrophic breakdown of this democratic experiment that we call America. And I think it is a teachable moment. All 4 years of Trumpism is a teachable moment for this country, that this shining city on a hill that we like to think of ourselves as experience some very dark years, and that it can happen to us at any given point in time, and it can happen to any other industrialized democracy around the world, and that we must remain vigilant. We must understand how we got to where we were with Trumpism, so to speak, in order to prevent ever getting there in the future.
Mm-hmm. So here are a few events having occurred in the week since episode 1: the inauguration of President Biden, change in administration, sweeping changes in policy and executive orders, initiation of an impeachment trial. So panel, and please talk among yourselves, what additional actions or events have you noticed in that week, and how do they impact this evolving republic?
Well, I think for reporters, it's kind of a return to normality. I mean, the White House press shop is sending out news releases that are topical and informative and keeping up with what President Biden and Vice President Harris are doing. I mean, in the latter weeks of the Trump presidency, there was very little information provided to journalists. Now we're back to daily press briefings. And so I think that a lot of the political press corps is breathing a sigh of relief. I feel that we still have a lot of work to do to restore what we think of things that are normal. And really, there's nothing in law that stipulates they have to operate that way. It's just been tradition. And we saw, as Stacey mentioned, that we came very close to having a catastrophic breakdown of democracy. So I think that people need to keep their eye on the ball And we still should be thinking about safeguards and reforms that we can put in place to make sure that we don't come as close as we just did to a breakdown.
And I kind of want to piggyback off of that. We saw some of the best reporting, White House reporting ever those last 4 years. We got some incredible scoops. The Washington Post, New York Times, Bloomberg, like all of these publications were, CNN. They were like, dropping incredible scoops about White House intrigue. But I don't think we can let up. I think you got to hold the new administration to the same standards that you held the previous administration to. And I know that administration was a little bit more difficult to work with the press, but just because someone's a friendlier face doesn't mean that we have to let up, take the foot off the neck. We got incredible amounts of information about what it was like inside of there. And I think that should continue. I think we should still have that same level of reporting, even if the person, is less of the big bad, so to speak.
I think that's a really important point. It's cliche, but it's true that democracy dies in the dark. We need scrutiny on our elected officials and influencers, leaders who have the ability to make decisions that impact millions of people. We need due scrutiny. But also, I think with that scrutiny comes political discourse that needs to happen. And I actually worry about this. This is one of my biggest concerns for our democracy and for the future, is that it almost seems as if people are living in their own realities. People are able to create facts to support their own belief system. And people are choosing to deny scholarship and expertise that might say otherwise. And I don't know how we address that, but along with the scrutiny that I think every administration deserves and this country deserves, we've got to figure out how to address this sort of fake news, alternate facts universe that has been created.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Several ways we could go. Oh, go ahead, Laura. Okay, several ways that we could take this discussion. You seem to be, I want to ask if the country seems to have calmed down a bit. Is that just my imagination, or has there been kind of a national exhale, or have the tensions merely gone underground temporarily, or, has there been a collective national processing of this insurrection? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, nobody wakes up in the morning
to
check
Stacey's
Twitter to
point,
see what the president has tweeted. I will say that.
Uh-huh.
Right. I mean, a large segment of the population, I think, did exhale. People would like to go back to not having to worry about what new crisis the president instigated this morning. But on the other hand, there's still a large segment of the population that believes, with no evidence to back it up, that the election was stolen, and that is very upset about the transfer of power that just occurred. And we saw today, I mean, we're doing the taping in advance of when the show will air, but 45 Republican senators voted to dismiss the impeachment charges on the grounds that Trump isn't president anymore, so it's not relevant, which to me is if you attempted murder is still a crime, even if you don't successfully murder someone. And attempting to steal an election and remain in power after losing an election is still an impeachable offense and should be something that we don't just sweep under the rug just because it didn't succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any going back to the status quo. I mean, the status quo has been obliterated. I mean, sure, it's nice that you can wake up and check Twitter and you don't have to worry about the president trying to start a war or picking on another country or another country's leader. But at the same time, the status quo is gone. And then, like Laura pointed out, there's still millions of people who believe this election was stolen and that it wasn't a fair election. And, that resentment and those feelings are not just going to go away just because we say it's all said and done.
And on the other side of that coin, if I may, I think we're sleeping a bit easier at night, but there was so much damage done in the last 4 years that I think a lot of folks, myself included, feel like we need to keep pressure on this administration. I mean, President Biden and Vice President Harris have an enormous job ahead of them. And that is fixing the mess that was left behind, but also doing the proactive things that need to be done to move this country forward. And what I hope people of my own party understand about the pressure I intend to apply to this administration is not that I want the administration to fail. I certainly don't want that, or that I'm impatient. It's just that these things can't wait. And there are a lot of issues that if left unaddressed, I can see sort of impacting the fragility of our democracy headed forward, and at the very least, having an outsized impact on vulnerable populations.
And, to your point, even though the Trump administration is over, it's still sucking energy we're still concerned about the impact of the potential impeachment, or those things are still occupying us. So, that an administration is over, but we are still feeling the effects of that. And as you said, will for quite some time. It's always dangerous to indulge in what ifs. And so actually brought this up a little bit earlier, I think, Stacey and Laura. So I tread cautiously here, but express your thoughts about how close we did come to a government overthrow. And what about the argument that some things are worth dying for, and the nation was born of revolution?
Well, I think
Laura,
it's clear that if this election had been just a little bit closer, that it could have been stolen. If the election had been closer so that it only rested on one state, it's possible that state legislature might have just appointed a slate of pro-Trump electors instead of Biden electors, even though the population of the state voted for Biden. It's possible that the president's pressure on the Secretary of State of Georgia, that kind of pressure might have worked. And if the Republicans controlled the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, it's possible that they would have rejected the electoral vote count. So I think that we need to create some changes in the law to make sure that this is not possible for this kind of scenario to happen. I mean, for instance, in Michigan, there was a lot of pressure on the Wayne County Election Board. Wayne County is where Detroit is, to refuse to certify the results just in Wayne County. And it was all based on lies about non-existent fraud. But the fact that, we were fortunate that the members of the Wayne County Elections Board didn't go in that direction, but they could have. So we need to get rid of we need to eliminate the possibility that political actors can just reject the results of how people voted. And we need to make sure that the transition happens. There was the General Accounting Office head in the Trump administration didn't want to acknowledge that Joe Biden won the election, and so she wasn't releasing funds for week after week. That slowed down the transition. I mean, there are a lot of things that we can address in federal law, and just even with counting the electoral college votes, they probably need to change the law to make sure that in the future that nobody can monkey around with that process.
And there were Republicans that stood tall. I think we have to give credit to Mike Pence for standing in and doing his job. I mean, and not necessarily remaining under the influence. Yeah, Stacey, were you going to say something? Were you going to jump in?
There's so much to be said. I mean, I totally agree with Laura that we need to examine the safeguards around our presidential elections and everyone who participates in them. We probably need to examine the sort of antiquated process where even if a person wins the popular vote, they can somehow lose the presidency. And this gets at whether or not the Electoral College is still useful in this day and age. But what I also want to draw attention to, we certainly came close to a person trying to steal the election. That is Donald Trump trying to steal the election. We certainly came close to that. But democracy was sort of on the brink for 4 years leading up to that. I mean, we saw a violation of democratic norms almost on the daily. And whenever the president ran into the built-in safeguards within the Constitution, he would just fire an agency head or would actively meddle in investigations. That's something I don't want Americans to forget, because those sort of aberrations of democracy along the way, they may have started out small, but taken together, that was quite something to deal with.
Yeah, that is concerning. And looking at that model, I think that's probably part of the concern about the pending impeachment. Looking at that model, if I've heard people say, well, if he's not impeached, then how is he held accountable? And maybe he will try this again, or I don't want to make it too much about Trump, but certainly it is of concern. I have a question for Laura and Ty. Am I reading you right? This is from what I took from last week's episode. It seemed as though you advocated for a new type of journalism, like the old model was report the facts and maintain the objectivity at all costs. Are you advocating a more nuanced model of journalism?
Well, I rejected the conventional model of journalism 14 years ago when I started writing for this website. So the conventional model is that the reporter should not express any opinions, should, or in fact, maybe actively conceal those opinions and not betray what you think about any controversy that you might be covering. And I favor what I consider more of a transparent model, where it's still fact-based and research-based, but I'm not afraid to reveal my opinions about the issues that I cover, and I don't adopt a neutral stance if it's something that I have a strong feeling about. And it really isn't that new an idea. I mean, advocacy journalism is something that's been going on for a long time. I mean, The Nation in these times, Mother Jones. I mean, these are all publications that report news and break a lot of stories, but from a certain perspective. And I've been influenced by the work of Jay Rosen, who's a press critic, and he has criticized the he said, she said, faux neutrality model of journalism. He calls that the view from nowhere. And he thinks that journalists should speak from a viewpoint, but they should be transparent about what that viewpoint is. So that's something that I've been trying to do for a long time, and I would like to see more of that. I understand why in the conventional journalism model it might not always be practical, but for me, I feel that serves the readers well. And I even have had Republican readers tell me that they appreciate that I'm transparent about my opinions, that they don't necessarily agree with my opinions, but at least it's out there for the reader to see.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you look at the history of journalism in America, a lot of the first papers and newsletters started off with, it was like a lot of opinion mixed with some fact. And then when you got to the more conventional models like newspapers, towns used to have two newspapers, one for the Republicans, one for the Democrats. And, the truth was somewhere there in the middle. And so I think I don't think we need to blow up everything about conventional journalism as we see it these days, but you got to be able to a lot of times reporters walk on eggshells when covering something because they don't want to upset the source. They want that access. And you just got to be, you got to get over that hump, get over that fear of disrupting that relationship, and then just, be more direct with your readers, and then don't be afraid to challenge the powers that be. I mean, if you're talking to a state senator, a U.S. senator or something, and they tell you this, and, you look at their voting record, you look at their, their campaign donations, and you look at, their history and, past remarks from them, and they contradict what they're telling you now, put that in a story, call that out, blast that instead of just taking them at their word for it, which is, you shouldn't be doing that anyway. You're a reporter, not a recorder.
I want to unpack that, maybe dig a little deeper. This is kind of a lengthy question or comment. So, then, how do we find equal footing for all stakeholders? So that is, if we can't agree on what's factual, and if we can't agree on the basis of resolution and how do we agree on the basis of resolution and problem solving? So a slight, perhaps significant digression occurs to me. During the first impeachment, it seems one party stuck to an agreed upon set of rules. Another party seemed not to be bound by those rules, say obeying orders for subpoenas, just ignored, just thrown out the window. Mm-hmm. Baseball works because everybody agrees to play by certain rules, but if we can't agree who's on first base, then how do we get through a game? So my question again is, where is that balance point? Where do we find equal footing for all stakeholders? How do we do that?
I don't have a good answer. I mean, partisanship has sort of broken the impeachment system because the framers envisioned the idea that Congress would remove a president who abused his power. But of course, they weren't operating from a framework of political parties because those came later. But we saw at the end of Richard Nixon's presidency that it was Republicans in Congress who marched over to the White House and told him, you're going to have to resign or else you're going to be impeached and removed. But now we have the vast majority of Republicans in Congress covering for almost any conceivable abuse of power. I mean, it's hard to imagine a more obviously impeachable offense than calling the Secretary of State of Georgia and asking him to find votes to change the results of the state. Calling on people to disrupt the Electoral College count so that the transfer of power doesn't happen. I mean, those are just sort of fundamental problems that if Congress isn't willing to hold someone accountable for it because of partisanship, I mean, I don't really have an answer to that. And the reporting both sides of that story doesn't really work either, because it doesn't convey how far one side is outside of the reality and acknowledging what just occurred.
Yeah, I would add, to put a finer point on that, not all stakeholders are equal, or at least not all stakeholders are bringing equitable perspectives. So that is something I've always challenged reporters and journalists on, is if you're going to have me on to share my opinion about equity, knowing that I've done the work, I've done my homework, I've led on these issues, I'm appreciative to be there. But the opinion of someone who's coming from a non-academic place who has a bigoted point of view isn't equal. And it's not because they don't hold an elected office or they're not a recognized leader. It's because they haven't done the work. And this gets at sort of the dismissal of expertise in this country, and the belief that it's okay to create your own reality. I mean, you can extrapolate that, and we've got ourselves in this position where at the highest levels of government, folks are creating their own realities and trying to distort the fundamentals of democracy itself. That's a hard problem to solve. I don't know how we address it in full.
Yeah, and the thing is, facts are facts. Facts don't care about your feelings. Facts don't have a political party. Facts don't have an alignment. They're just that. But the problem is that we're in like a post-factual society, like you got a lot of times where, a well-researched article is dismissed easily by some people as fake news, but the Facebook meme they saw or the 10-minute YouTube video by the disbarred doctor is more, significant to them. And so how do we, reverse that? That's a tough question.
Yeah, well, we have a couple of challenges going on here, but let me just insert this. So what would the founding fathers say, or is that a irrelevant question?
I was going to say, we got 2 black men and 2 a black lady and a white woman, so I don't know if they would talk to us.
Yeah, I'm not interested, I guess, in the founder's perspective from that read. But I can tell you this. And Laura alluded to it earlier, the founders never game planned for Congress to shrink its duties. I mean, the reason we have a Republican democracy is because there was fear of a dictator king. That is what, the original Americans fled. And they wanted to develop a system that was egalitarian, that was a true republic. And so to see what happened in these the final weeks of the Trump administration, I think the founders would be abhorred by that.
Mm-hmm. I think also picking up on what Stacey said, that not all stakeholders are equal. I want to return to the media criticism a little bit that we've seen in newsrooms. And I think part of this is a reflection of the lack of diversity in newsrooms, at least at the upper levels of newsrooms, that there's been an excessive focus on the views and perspectives of a certain kind of voter, namely a white voter, usually a white man who supports Donald Trump. And there was just an endless stream of reporting of, going to diners and finding, Trump supporters still support Trump, basically. And when Trump lost the popular vote but became president, we got a lot of stories about how we need to understand the Trump voter. And now when Trump lost the popular vote and lost the presidency, there seemed to still be a lot of focus on the people who still support Donald Trump. And we don't see nearly as many features. They're not going to Arizona to talk about the Latino voters or the Native American voters who helped flip that state to Joe Biden. They're not going to Georgia to talk about who are the voters who flipped Georgia, people of color, young people, different from what we conceive of as a traditional white voter in the South. And so I think that distorts people's perception of what America really is about. And if the media is constantly framing real Americans as white people who support Donald Trump, that's not really informing the readers very well.
Yeah, I mean, I think interesting and valid points. My question was actually kind of tongue in cheek because we are constantly looking to founding fathers to establish rules and guidelines. I mean, we keep going back to that. It's like moving the goalposts, you know. Mm-hmm. No comment. Anybody want to?
I think Ty hit the nail on the head. I mean, there is a time and a place. I can understand sort of a originalist perspective. I understand why people think that's important, but the reality is this country has changed since its inception. It's changed dramatically, and a lot of that change is reflected in the amendments to the Constitution that, you know, among other things, gave women the right to vote and said African Americans were fully human beings and not 3/5 of a human being. So we needed these changes to our founding documents, which is why I reject the instinct to refer to our founding documents as some perfect guiding light for this country. I think it might have worked during that time, but we have to recognize that as with anything else, this country is changing, it's evolving, and we need to evolve with that.
Agreed. 100% agreed. We're slowly running out of time, or quickly running out of time. I don't know. I don't know which way it works. So I'm wondering if you would like to, each of you would like to talk about, you know, in conclusion, do we have a republic? Do we have a republic that's worth keeping?
I think we do. We just need to make sure that we protect it better against the next set of bad actors who might try to undermine it.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, we're the country that a lot of other countries look to, but just because it's worth keeping doesn't mean we can't fix it.
Oh, that's a great point. I will challenge, and I will say, I think we have a semblance of a democracy left, and not only do we need to protect it from bad actors, but an enduring threat is the obscene amount of money in our politics and how money can buy, you know, other federal elections and local elections, and how it can buy the support of certain politicians. And in that sense, our democracy is under a very real threat.
Well, I want to thank you all. The time has gone quickly, and I've learned a lot. And I just thank you for being present here at Ethical Perspectives on the News. And gosh, I guess we have enough to talk about. We're going to have another session going on here.
We got 50 seconds left, more or less. I just want to also thank my colleagues, my peers here for joining. These are the conversations that need to happen, and I hope that Americans start to pay attention. This stuff is important.
Agreed. And we've missed Paul. He wasn't able to join us, but you know, keeping him in our thoughts as well. So we'll continue our conversation. Maybe we'll have Paul along too. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you. All right. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.